Welcome everybody to Real Change Live. Delighted to have Dr. Bill Pettit again talking to us. And we've taken a little twist on this particular episode, episode number 4. And the twist is really the physical. Dr. Bill he's a psychiatrist. He was also trained in medicine, and he has worked for many years as a psychiatrist, but I believe he also, at some point when he was studying, he worked in hospitals. So he's obviously spent a lot of time understanding the body as well as the mind. And today's episode is very much about, well, what is that relationship between what happens in our minds, in our thinking, and what happens in the physical? So Dr. Bill's going to talk to us technically about that, but he's also going to explore with us how there can be hope for real change, because the physical is kind of physical, right? It's in our face. It's right there. So how when we're up against the physical can there be hope for real change? And he's going to not only tell us how it works, where the hope lies, but also some real stories of where he's personally witnessed a transformation, a physical transformation. So welcome. We're delighted to have you. And over to you, to where you'd like to start tonight, Dr. Bill.
Okay. Well, in a way, you're not supposed to, I suppose, first thing you do is you don't contradict the person that's is invited you, right? So when you say it's a twist, in a way, from my perspective, at least, Elizabeth, it's not a twist. And I'll explain why. I know it is to people, and I know what you're pointing to. But to me, our first, to kind of review, our first lecture was on how chronic mental stress is behind every mental disease and most physical diseases, okay? And the first thing that happens when people get into a chronic state of mental stress that we experience, and these I'm going to ask people to start thinking of these things that they have thought of as diseases, physical and mental, as wonderful, wonderful, wonderful alarm systems that have been given to us to try to wake us up so that we stop doing what we're doing. Now, and I'm going to make a case for that, but because the three things that happen uniformly to me, if you take 100 people and they get into mental and distress for 4 or 5, 6, even 4, 5, 6 hours a day, let alone the 10, 12, 14, 16 that I see people doing, 3 things will happen. One, they will experience a lowering of their mood. Well, the lecture number 2 was they will experience an increased level of tension, which we call anxiety. We've labeled anxiety. That's an alarm system. It's trying to go, hey, stop doing it. The other thing that happens our mood will start to go down. And if we go down far enough, we'll start to get irritable. And then we'll even get disconnected. Again, hey, you got the button on the down button and wondering why you're headed for the basement again, And the third thing that happens is the body will start having alarm systems go off. Alarm systems to go off to try to let us know that we are headed in the wrong direction, the way we're using these incredibly universal gifts and powers of mind, thought, and consciousness. And I'm just going to come from that perspective. I'm not asking anybody to believe it. There's a logic behind it that is pretty powerful. And I am going to address people, some incredible stories, and I'll make sure that I told Elizabeth before that for every hour we have, I could fill it 6 or 8 hours. And so I have to put it, confined. But I'm going to tell some stories about migraines, severe, terrible headaches for 25 years, life-threatening asthma, incredible abdominal pain for 20 years, somebody on 24-hour oxygen who's literally lung studies normalized. The pulmonologist sent me a letter saying, I've never seen this. Irritable bowel syndrome, colitis, Crohn's disease, all kinds of inflammatory bowel, allergies, a stroke, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, back injury. We'll talk about broken heart, what's behind that. And but before we even start to do that, the question that I'd like to bring up in far as hope is, to quote Mr. Banks, he said that, and if I don't, I'm just going to remember it as best as I can. Basically, Mr. Banks in The Missing Link said that the achievement of mental stability and peace of mind is one thought away from everyone on earth. One thought away. Now, at the end of this presentation, I think people will have a glimpse that that's true. That's true. And all you can do is point people in the direction of where that one thought is. Each person has to be willing to look inside. And the example I'm going to give at the beginning here will seem totally unrelated to what we're talking about as far as the physical illnesses and as alarm systems. And it's about a man named Ashoka. Do you know about Ashoka? Yeah, well, don't be surprised, because most of us, at least in the UK, I think is the same as kind of in the United States. I mean, sadly, what we learn about in history as we go up in school is we learn about the white people. We learn about Europeans. We learn about the Romans and the Greeks, who learned a lot of their stuff from the Egyptians, but we don't learn about Egypt. We learn about the Romans and the Greeks. And Ashoka was from India, and he was a leader about 230 BC, so over 2,000 years ago. And if my Indian doctor friends, of course, they say, well, Ashoka, we all know about Ashoka. Well, I'd say, we Americans don't, because they don't teach us about that. So Ashoka, and I'll be quick with my story here, but the point is that it can happen at any moment. Ashoka took over for his father, who had conquered a lot of lands and gotten the Indian empire bigger and bigger. And Ashoka took over as a young man after his father died, and he did the same. He went into this place called where the Kalingas lived. And the Kalingas, he conquered. The Kalingas weren't causing they weren't threatening. They weren't doing anything. He went in and he conquered them. And he killed over 100,000 people, his armies did. And they took over 150,000 people as prisoners and slaves and deported them from their country. And after he had done that, one day, suddenly, Ashoka had that one thought, and he was filled with remorse. He was filled with remorse. And from that moment on, he disavowed himself of any violence towards anyone. He said, I consider how I might bring happiness to the people, not only to the relatives of mine or the residents of my capital city, but to those who are far removed from me. I act in the same manner with respect to all. I am similarly concerned with all classes. Moreover, I have honored all religious sects with various offerings. I consider my principal duty to visit people personally. And education became important. Health became important. He asked people to listen to one another. Human rights for all, including men and women. Here we are in the United States. We haven't even celebrated 100 years that you can vote because you're a different sex. Crazy, right? So Ashoka knew this, and he had that one thought that changed everything. And I want people to keep that in mind as we go forward of what is always possible. I think on the thing that you sent out, but I'm going to review it because we're packing a lot, but if you don't understand the stress response, you won't understand the illnesses. So when people get into a stress response, it's motivated by what they call the hypothalamic pituitary axis. Some people know that better than others. But there is a whole system that responds when we experience threat. And that system was meant for life-threatening situations, period. It is meant to be activated for 30 minutes, maximum up to 60 minutes. Once every 24 to 72 hours. And when it gets activated, incredible things happen in the body that make people be able to lift up cars when the jack has come down on his chest, makes people able to combat life-threatening situations with strength that they never knew they had. And it has saved many people's lives. And it also has allowed some people to get completely quiet and know that being totally not moving was the thing to do. But what it does, it activates tremendous amounts of norepinephrine and epinephrine, or noradrenaline, I think is more familiar in the UK, which raises blood pressure, which eventually over time, if it keeps going, will lead to plaques being laid down because it keeps shooting the high pressure and causes abrasion and inflammation, and you get clotting, you get clots, and you get strokes, you get heart attacks, you get thrombophlebitis, you get incredible amounts of glucose released into the bloodstream. Incredible amounts. For every molecule from the liver, 10 to the 8th, I forget that is, 100 million molecules of glucose. Well, that's needed in a life-threatening situation. But if you're doing that with 4, 6, 8 hours a day of worry, guilt, resentment, upset, overanalyzing, and unresolved grief, you're putting such a load on your pancreas that it's almost in the cards that you're going to get type 2 diabetes eventually. Your cholesterol is going to go up. Why? Cholesterol attacks free radicals. But the problem is, like the book, if people want to learn about the bad news, why zebras don't get ulcer. This man is funny. He's brilliant. He's a Stanford researcher. His name is Robert Sapolsky. He's brilliant. And he says, the problem is when you get into a stress response, it's like having 2 elephants on a seesaw. And what happens is, if you have 2 little kids on a seesaw, they can adjust their weight and not too big of a problem. But you have 2 elephants on a seesaw, it's a problem. And it's hard to fix one problem in the body over time without knocking something else out of balance. So when people stay in a stress situation, they activate systems to try to fix the place that's got the worst imbalance, but it causes imbalance somewhere else. And it causes, he says, a long history of doing this produces wear and tear throughout the entire body. They call it allostatic load. If you repeatedly turn on the stress response or can't turn it off, it's going to cause damage. It's just going to cause damage. The other things that happen is you knock out your immune system that fights infections and fights cancers. It's lowered 40 to 70% in the state of chronic stress. And then on the other hand, you activate what they call the inflammatory response. And the inflammatory response is really important in an emergency. But over time, you get many of the diseases that we're going to talk about are inflammatory, or an effect of a thing of the inflammatory response being chronically activated. For instance, tinnitus. Somebody said about their ears ringing. If you look that up, a lot of places will say, oh, it's from too much noise, loud noise, it's from too much exposure to this, exposure to that. And those things may be a factor. But what they're finding now is, from the research, is that tinnitus and I love the quote, tinnitus, there's over 15 million people that have tinnitus. The presence of inflammation-based tinnitus is a warning sign that the entire body is inflamed. Wow. That tinnitus would be one of those alarm systems that would try to say your entire body's inflammatory system is turned on, is turned up way too high. And I'm trying to let you know first by a little ringing in your ears. But if you don't hear, you're going to hear it with fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, migraines, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. Now, the other dangerous thing or potentially dangerous to talk about this is for people to start to blame themselves. And believe me, it doesn't make any sense if you have physical problems to blame yourself any more than me blaming myself for 21 years of going in and out of severe clinical depression. I did not know any better. I was doing the best that I knew how. And the answer eventually is going to be, and I'll get their websites. I don't know. Do you know Dawn Cashin, her last name? Quinn Cashin?
Quinn Cashin?
Yeah, do you know Quinn? Yeah, and
I know of her. I don't.
Well, and Krista Campsell and Brooke, because the answer eventually is going to be teaching this in middle school and grade school and high school. That's where the answer. Now, intermediately, I could see every medical practice in the country have 2 to 3 mental health educators working in their medical practice. Not psychologists necessarily, not psychiatrists, mental health educators, teaching people how to access their mental health. Okay, maybe I prepared more than I usually do, but there's a reason for it. I wanted to really, so I'm going to talk about and chronic pain. Pain, one of the things that Dr. Sapolsky says is that pain, we think of pain as something that's fixed, but we all know that when we're in a stressed out state of mind, our experience of pain is different than when we're at peace. Anybody who has pain notices fluctuations. I noticed and this is kind of a silly one, but when I played football in high school, if we lost the game, I was in much more pain in my body after the football game. Every bruise I had in my body was painful. If we won the game, I might have a hairline fracture in my forearm and not even know it until noon the next day because of the endorphins and the excitement of winning. The emotional part of pain is pain. It affects, acupuncture, for instance, works even in animals. It works in animals because it's activating something that's internal. Not only that, how you respond to the pain information coming up from the spinal cord is affected by your emotional state of mind. And not only that, he says, but how the spinal cord responds to the painful information depends on your state of mind, whether you're at peace or not. I mean, amazing. It's just amazing. And why is this important? Because if I have had many people with fibromyalgia who, once they saw the principles deeply, as they had incremental insights, at first their need for, I had some people who were even on narcotics, and they got to where they were occasionally would take a Tylenol for their pain. And usually even when they had any exacerbations at all, they started to see their fibromyalgia as their friend that it was a sign, oh, yeah, I got worrying about my grandson's drug problem. I got worrying about this. I got stewing about that. They started seeing that for them, their fibromyalgia was an alarm system. Migraine headaches. Up until 1999, and I did some research on this because we were always taught that it was a vascular phenomenon. And now, starting in 2005, there was a wonderful study in neurology, and they're showing that it's an inflammatory disorder. It's a sign in some people how their alarm system that goes off are migraine headaches, because it's all from an overactivation of the inflammatory system. Psoriasis, asthma, eczema, a lot of skin diseases are attempts of the body to let us know that we are innocently stressing ourselves out. And we've taken ourselves away from a neurobiology of resilience and health. There's a whole neurobiology called the main ingredients, instead of norepinephrine and glucocorticoids, cortisone and glucose, are things like neuropeptide Y and galanine and DHEA. And there was one study where they showed that of 100 people with migraines, 36% had fibromyalgia. And all 100 of them had very high inflammatory markers and very low neuropeptide Y. And it's innocent. It's so innocent. But here's what I want to do now. I want to tell some stories that show that it can be reversed, just like Ashoka's as a king, that what happens to us physically is happening to us. There is an internal place. If you, to me, it's universal mind is what we are. You know, in Mr. Banks in The Missing Link, he says, some people think the inner self is God and the outer self is the body. But I can assure you, they're both the same. Now, if people don't like the word God there, they can use Curly Moe, Larry, or they could use universal mind. Some people think that the inside is that universal mind and the outside is the body, but they're both the same in different disguises. Einstein said everything in this universe is the same energy in a different disguise. I mean, scientists know this. So why do I think that love and, you know, when Mr. Banks says in The Enlightened Gardener, mental stress and distress is to mental illness as damp and dark is to fungus. It makes it grow. I would add that also most physical illnesses. Mental stress and distress is to mental illness, and most physical illnesses, if not all, is as damp and dark is to fungus. It makes it grow. On the other hand, love and lightheartedness is to mental illness as sunlight and dry is to fungus. It eradicates it. And it does the same thing with physical illness. Now, we are all human beings, and most of us, myself included, are probably not going to see these principles perfectly. Sid said there's an infinite number of doors into the nature of these three principles. I myself got stressed about 6 years ago now for a number of weeks. I got something on my mind that I was not able to allow myself to quiet. And what happened? My blood pressure went up. I gained considerable weight. And I had to go on blood pressure medicine. And my thyroid, it knocked out part of my thyroid to where I had to start taking some Synthroid. Now here we are 6 years later, I've lost a number of amount of the weight, but I'm still 35 pounds over what I should be. I'm only on 5 of the blood pressure medicine instead of 10. And I know that if I lost the last 25 pounds that I wouldn't be on it at all. But I'm still on a little bit of thyroid. And I'm not all I know to me is to keep trying to learn, try to listen, trying to see how to live, to see how these principles work and live and love as best as I can in my life. Live my life more than anything. I don't think a lot about it. I just do the best that I can. So let me tell you a couple of stories here. Is this okay, or is there anything you wanted to interrupt me with? Is this okay?
No, this is perfect. I think what people are dying to hear is it really possible to transform physical symptoms that you've just listed through an understanding of the mind? So tell us.
So somehow, I don't know what happened, I somehow lost your picture. And I've got Zoom in front of me. Let's see. Oh, there you're back. Yeah, okay. Okay, well, so I'm going to tell some stories here. And these are real stories from my practice. There's a man named Ed Dickerson. He was wonderful. When I first came to Bradenton in Florida after finishing my fellowship, and by the way, I was a family doctor for 2.5 years in the Navy with a squadron of naval aviators and their families. And then before that, I had done 2 years of surgery, 36 on, 12 off of general surgery. So I'd worked with the physical side of it for 5.5 years before I ever even started training in psychiatry. But I had finished my fellowship with about a year after I had met Mr. Banks. I'd finished, then I did a 10-month fellowship with Roger Mills, Rick Suarez, and Kim Cadu, through 3 PhD psychologists who had studied with Mr. Banks. And I came to Bradenton, Florida, and went into private practice of psychiatry. And this family physician, who was very, very busy, was kind enough to have me put an office initially until I got my own office. And within days there, I was called to the hospital, which I just had to go down and walk over the bridge. And this woman, we'll call her Rose, she was about 82 years old. And she was in an asthma attack, and Dr. Dickerson called me and said, "Bill, we're trying every medicine the pulmonologist is using. We're afraid she's going to die. We cannot stop her asthma attack." I said, "Can you tell me anything about it?" I said, "Well, it seems like her asthma has gotten more out of control since her husband died 6 weeks ago." So I go there, and here's this 82-year-old lady who's got all these tubes and this thing, and she's and if you've ever been around somebody with asthma, it's heartrending because we take so much for granted. I've been breathing all day today, and until that moment just now, I wasn't aware that I was breathing. We do it with such ease. And when she could even get any breath at all, she would start sobbing. Tears were coming down her cheeks. And I said to her, and it doesn't matter what I said, I was just present with her. I knew something that she didn't know. And God knows I don't know what I said, but I said, first thing I said was, "Rose, I'm going to talk for 3 minutes if you'll let me. And at the end of the 3 minutes, all you have to do is put your hand up and I will go away. There'll be no charge for this consultation. If you do this, I will keep talking." At the end of 3 minutes, I told her basically, when you got somebody that's dying, you can't mess around. I said, "Listen, this is not from your husband's death. It's from what you're doing with your thinking about your husband's death right in this moment, that you haven't accepted what already is. And there is a place of mental well-being inside of you that will manifest as physical well-being, but you can't do it if you're holding on to your thinking as you're doing now." Something like that. To make a long story short, after 3 minutes, I said, "Do you want me to go or do you want me to keep talking?" And I witnessed, one of the first times I really witnessed things like this. This is 34 years ago. Before I knew it, she was breathing normally. And she was talking to me. That was after all the strongest medicines that the pulmonologist and the internist had failed. talking to her soul, talking to her place where divine energy is there, talking to her as if she is divine energy, which to me she is. There was a place where she heard. Fast forward about 8 months, she came to me, she came for about 8 visits, and I said, Rose, I'd love to have you come just 4 more visits. She said, no, Dr. Pettit, I'm fine. I'm going to be fine now. And I said, really? I think you'll just deepen your understanding. No, I'm okay. Now, Rose worked at in her 80s, she worked at a drugstore. She worked there, behind the counter. I don't know what she did. But what I know is that 8 months, so she came, and about 4 or 5 months after her last visit, I am packed in my station wagon with my wife, my late wife, Sue, and my 4 children, and we are heading for vacation to the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, to Ed Dickerson's cottage up in the Smoky Mountains. And as we close the door, as we're just about to close the door to the car and getting all the kids in, I hear the phone ringing in the house. This is before cell phones, folks. I know some of you are young enough that you don't know that happened within our lifetime, but there were no cell phones. There was not even at that time, I don't know that I even had a phone in my car, a car phone. And my wife, Sue, looked at me and she said, you want to answer that phone, don't you? I said, yeah, I do. I don't know why, but I do. She said, it's okay, honey. Go ahead and answer it. I went inside and Dr. Dickerson said, Bill, we're going to lose Rose. She's dying again. We're called out on the island to the drugstore where she was. She was in total asthmaticus. They put a tube in her. We can't stop the asthma. She's going to die. We've got her on a ventilator, but she's dying. Can you please come to the hospital? I said, of course I can. So I went out to the car and Sue said, you have to go, don't you? And I said, I do, honey. I have to. But I'll be back in a couple of hours. So she got all the kids. She was a wonderful doctor's wife. She knew that sometimes things were more important than things being the way we wanted them. And she unpacked the kids and took them inside, and I went to the hospital. And I sat there, and I didn't know Rose looked like she was in coma, but I talked to her. I said, Rose, I don't know what it was, but I know what happened. You got caught up in negative thinking, upsetting thinking about something. You have re-exacerbated your I don't know, I probably didn't say your inflammatory system, but you have activated your body in such a way that it is closed down even your breathing, those little cells in the little muscles in your breathing, and you're going to die if you don't let go of it. You've got to let go of it. And I held her hand and I talked to her and I cried, and suddenly she started breathing normal again. The asthmatic started wheezing. It lessened, and she actually woke up, and she was able to tell me what happened. That some of the young people were coming into work, and they would not show up for work, and they wouldn't even call in to say they weren't coming in. And she started thinking about this younger generation. These kids, they don't have any respect. They don't this, they don't that. And then she started thinking, oh my gosh, they didn't even send me, not one of them sent me a sympathy card when Joe died. Not one of them. And then she started thinking about Joe's death. And the next thing, she's lying on the floor, gasping for air, and they're calling 911. Powerful. Powerful? She came back. We met for 4 to 6 times. She was fine. Give you another one. A lady comes to me, and she had spent, in the last 25 years, she'd been to every headache clinic in the country. She woke up every morning with incapacitating almost headaches. She was on a line of medicine. She'd gone to every headache clinic, the big ones in Chicago. There's ones out in Texas. She'd been all over. And of course, she didn't have any insurance for her psychological needs, psychiatry. She had really good insurance that had spent $250,000 or $300,000 on physical medications and consultations. And she came. I said, we'll work something out. I said, they used to barter for chickens. Do you have any chickens? I said, we'll work out the payment. I said, come to group originally after the initial evaluation. And again, I'm aware of the time. She came for 2 sessions to group after our initial thing. And she never came back, Elizabeth. And I was puzzled. And I waited for 2 weeks and I called her and I said, Sarah, you didn't come back to group. Was it something I said? Was it something I did? She said, oh, no, doctor. I'm so sorry. I should have called you. I said, what happened? She said, my headaches went away. I said, you told me you've had them excruciating for 25 years on a daily basis. She said, yes. She said, they went away, doctor. They went away on my way home from your second group. I said, what happened, Sarah? She said, I realized that I had not forgiven my husband's one-time infidelity 25 years ago. And my heart was filled with compassion and love for him and appreciation and gratitude of what a wonderful husband he's been, what a wonderful father he's been, what a wonderful provider he's been. And my heart was filled with love for him. And at that moment, my headaches disappeared and they will never, ever come back again. Think of the millions of dollars of healthcare dollars that would be freed up, folks, if more people were at peace. So Judy Sedgman came with me once I was scheduled to go out to take a full-time position at West Virginia University at the Sydney Banks Institute in 2002. I'd been in Aberdeen for 8 years. I'd been a consultant to the hospital for the developmentally disabled and the autism hospital for 7 years there. And the patients all made a big big going away party for me, and they cooked, they had chocolate cake and everything. But the staff wanted me to do a 2-day program. So we had 91 employees, and we did a 2-day program there. And I told that story that I just told about the lady with the headaches on day 1. At the end of day 2, this lady came up to me, her name, we'll call her Barbara, and she said, Doctor, she pulled me aside, she said, Doctor, do you remember that story you told yesterday about that lady with 25 years of headaches? I said, yeah. She said, I've had 19 years of severe, incapacitating, almost abdominal pain for 19 years. I've been to Mayo Clinic, and she listed all the clinics. She listed the list of medicines she was on every day to try to keep her spasm and her pain under control. And she said, on the way home, I realized that I too, it just happened that they were the same story. I too had not forgiven my husband for a one-time infidelity 19 years ago. And I suddenly felt incredible love for him and compassion and gratitude. And my stomach, for the first time in nearly 20 years, felt completely calm. And I woke up this morning for the first time in 19 plus years with a stomach that was completely calm. And I had no pain, and I will not have any pain from here on, I know. Now, remember what Sid said, one thought? Mental well-being, and I would say physical well-being, is one thought away from anybody at one time. People don't have to believe these stories. I don't tell lies. I'm too old to do that. I might have told some non-truths when I was young, but I want to go to I know that old country song, let me make sure turn this off. I know that old country song is that what you do during the day, you go to bed with at night. So I honor the truth. And you can see this as unrealistic, but I will tell you it's real. I had a lady who came to me. She literally was on oxygen 24 hours a day because of her breathing problems. And then she would get worried. She'd have anxiety about not getting enough air, and she'd have panic attacks on top of her 24-hour oxygen. And she had lung studies that showed that what they call her FEV1 and her lung capacity and everything was markedly decreased. And all I can tell you is that one day, whether it was after we had talked or watching Mr. Banks's videos, reading Mr. Banks's books that we had available at that time, she suddenly came in and she said, "My breathing is fine." And she said, my medicines start giving me side effects, so my lung doctor is reducing. She used to have a box, a whole thing full of them, these lung medicines. And eventually she was on no medicines for her lungs. And the doctor did lung studies and sent me a copy of them and said, "I have never seen this in 20 years as a pulmonologist. Her lungs are completely normal." Now, I know that inside every little alveoli that opens and closes as we breathe is a little muscle. If that muscle is in tension constantly, it's going to have a hard time opening up and letting the air in and out. And people are going to have wheezing. Which brings you to chronic back pain and chronic neck pain. The body is meant to be able to heal. It has a healing internal capacity to heal psychologically and physically. But if we are in a state of stress, not only the muscle tension keeps it from healing, but just the healing mechanism in the body. So as I think I might have mentioned this in the Bill and Melinda Gates funded study that was recently in British journal Lancet, in 195 countries, showed that in all 195 of the countries, whether in a low socioeconomic or a high socioeconomic, as far as disability, keeping people from functioning in their life, low back pain and neck pain were number 1, 2, or 3 in every country in the world. And it has one cause: chronic mental stress. And the inflammatory responses and the things that happen from it. So let me tell one more story. And this is of a man that I think even though it's related to, I think it's worthwhile. I was asked to see this man that had had a severe stroke that had knocked out his have I told this story? Do you remember? No. And this was in Miami, and he had been our ambassador to Brazil. He was a Spanish-looking man and a powerful-looking man, and you could tell he had a presence to him, but he'd had this massive stroke, and he was unable to talk more than a few words before he couldn't get the words, and he'd get frustrated, and he couldn't speak because he had, and it looked like a doctor would say, a neurologist would say, "Of course he can't. Look at his brain scan. He's knocked out Broca's area, the speech area." So I talked to him because I had learned that at least theoretically, neuropsychologists said the brain has the ability to go around the injured areas. But it doesn't do it, and we don't know why. It's kind of like if we run into a washed out road, we usually can get around it somehow. So I kept talking to him. I said, "I don't know, but I do know that right now when you're getting frustrated and angry and upset that you can't speak and you've lost something that was really important to you," I said, "and I understand it, but it's going to cause more problems elsewhere in your body, if not here. Keep whatever healing is able to occur in this area, it can't occur when you're doing this." And I taught him what I did know about the principles in 1984. Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, I spoke to him. He said, doctor, in broken, and the few words he could get out, don't think I've learned anything. And I said, it's okay. Just sit with it. Have a nice weekend. See you on Monday. I walk in on Monday, Elizabeth, and he starts talking to me as I walk in the door. And he's talking 40 or 50 words before he has trouble finding the word. And then he doesn't get frustrated, and I can guess what the word is within 1 or 2 words. He says, yes. He talks another 50 or 60 words, and finally, within a few minutes, I said, I'm thinking, wait a minute. This is not, what the hell's going on here? I said, Jose, what happened over the weekend? He said, well, my daughter called me on Saturday. We had not spoken for 28 years. We had an argument 28 years ago, and we had not spoken. And she heard that I had this horrible stroke, and she was on the phone, and she started sobbing, saying, Daddy, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I let my pride get in the way of our relationship. And he started crying and saying, you're the child. It was my responsibility to teach you about humility, not you, me. I am so sorry that I wasted 28 years of our life, and yet I am so grateful to hear your voice. He got off the phone, Elizabeth, after talking to his daughter for 30 minutes. And he had not had to search for a word once in 30 minutes. He still had the same massive stroke, knocking out Broca's area. But in that feeling level, something else was happening. I'm reminded of actually a story, a series that the BBC did probably 25 years ago now in Britain. And they had a brain scan of this little gal, and she had hydrocephalus. And all that she had was a thin layer of brain tissue around the outside. And this was on the BBC. It was a brain, and they had given that brain scan to 10 neurologists, and they said, what would this person's life be like? And they said, well, they'd be unable to move their arms and legs. They'd be in a bed. They'd have to be fed with a feeding tube. Their arms would be up like this. Their legs would be like this. They would have total care to keep them alive. To their surprise, she was captain of the field hockey team. Now, what the people said about her from the time she was born as a youngster, she had incredible spunk. She had incredible feeling level, incredible gratitude, incredible aliveness, incredible joy. I don't know. All I'm saying is that there's a mystery here, and it has to do with what the principles are pointing to. That's all I can say. I could give examples again for 3 or 4 more hours, but let me stop here because I'm aware of the time. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope it awakens some hope for people. And here's the deal. Just all I know is whatever you're experiencing physically, just do the best you can to live each day with a light heart and with joy, and continue your journey to understand more deeply, which I think through Sydney Banks's source material of books, or get somebody who's happy themselves and is a teacher of the principles, and deepen your level and understanding of the principles, period. So.
Incredible stories of transformation. And when you make it the case, Bill, about mental stress has this physical effect on the body, and when we stay in it, it's also logical that it then turns into these illnesses. And then I guess it dances with some kind of predisposition each person might have physically, but that's such a simple and clear way. I don't know, just the story, everything you've said just makes sense.
Well, everybody has their own alarm systems. That's what's hereditary. is which alarm systems go off for you first.
Right.
For
There
some
you
people,
go.
it's ringing in their ears. For some people, it's a migraine. For some people, it's their bowels getting out of control. You know, there's more neurons in our bowel, in our 2.5 times more than there is in our brain. That's why the bowels, the stomach is so often. People say, I hit me in the gut, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a question here that I'm really interested in hearing the answer to. I'm cherry picking here, but there's the question is, what would you say? There's a kind of lot of treatment therapies, meditations, things that talk about you storing in the body your emotions. And so what would you say to someone who believes that his meditation practice, which he believes that he needs to do this meditation practice because it encourages them to purge the emotional or physical pain that's stored in the body? How do you see that?
Well, the grain of truth in that is that there's a grain of truth. I mean, it's one way of seeing it, that as long as I'm holding on to something painful from the past, whether it's something I've done that I haven't forgiven myself for, or something that somebody else did that I haven't forgiven them for, and I haven't seen the innocence and the ignorance. And Sid's chapter on love and forgiveness in The Missing Link is just, to me, so powerful. But so, yeah, to the degree that I am holding on to something from the past, or I haven't accepted a loss, somebody who died 15 years ago, and every time I even mention their name, I go into tears and grief. It's usually because that person was supplying something in my life that I haven't learned how to get from the inside. I don't realize happiness is inside of me. It's not external to me. And so I would say that there's a grain of truth in that, and that whatever you haven't come to peace with, it's going to be, I don't know if stored is the word, but it is ongoingly, I don't know if it's ongoingly creating hyperinflammation, hyper load of glucose, norepinephrine. It's inflammatory cytokines. It's just doing that as long as you're still holding on to it. And what meditation does is it tries to help people decenter from the content of their thinking. You know, it tries to help them slow down their mind. Well, through a technique, and some people I know that they'll say, I have to meditate an hour twice a day in order to just deal with all the tension I feel, you know, because of my work or and I used to have to run 5 to 7 miles every day years ago before I met Sid, to deal with the tension and stress that I had accumulated. Now, that was better than 5 to 7 drinks every night of martinis or Manhattans, you know, but it was still, I was having to find something on the outside in to try to relieve this. And all this is saying is that there's an understanding of the universal principles at work in the universe, and that we are part and parcel of. That as you understand that, you don't need to do techniques. You naturally and effortlessly find your life getting gentler and gentler and gentler. Now, I'm not one of those people that got knocked off their horse. And to me, it's been an incremental journey for, I would say, every 6 months in the last 34 years, my life has gotten a little gentler inside, regardless of the losses, the deaths, the economic things, everything else that happens on the outside. That's you know, life is going to go this way, but what we want to do is to just go this way. We don't want to have to hooked onto the roller coaster ride of the external world.
No, and that's the incredible gift of understanding the nature of thought, right? I think.
And the spiritual nature.
And the principles themselves.
Yeah.
Who we are. Yeah. So I'm going to come back to something you've touched on, but I'm imagining people out there are like, wow, yeah, I really can see how when I get caught up in my thinking, I'm creating a low mood. The low mood is creating an emotional kind of component in my body. The body is then now crystallizing that. It's giving me a warning signal. I'm ignoring it. And then over time, that can create physical illness. So I can see that. And then next time I'm in some kind of mind thought storm, I'm now, oh no, I'm now going to create physical illness in my body. And then I'm adding all sorts of judgment to, I know what I'm doing now. So what would you say to people who might find themselves in that kind of thinking?
Okay. I would say before that, very simply, to ask yourself, of the waking hours that you're awake, how many of them are you at a quiet peace? Very simple. And if the answer isn't at least 95% of the time, then I wouldn't wait for some physical thing to happen. I would say, I want to see more deeply. I want to live more peacefully. I want to live more lovingly. And to me, understanding the principles is the fastest avenue, because you don't wait till your boat is sinking you don't want your alarm to go off on your yacht a half an inch below before it takes on enough water to sink. You want to become aware as soon as you're taking on any stress at all. It is true that the more you understand the principles, it lowers your tolerance for stress. It doesn't raise your tolerance. And for 41 years of my life, I had tried to raise my tolerance for stress. Because if you believe that it's from the outside in, then you're screwed. You can't do anything about it. All you can do is learn how to function with 250, now 270, now 300 pounds of stress on my back. But if you see the external world not as stressful, but as there's challenges, there's no doubt about it. You lose 2 or 3 members of your family in a motor vehicle accident, or you have one death after another, or one economic thing after another, and now you're on food stamps, and you used to be a professor, or used to be a doctor, or if you don't have a spiritual, or suddenly a truck goes through a stop sign and you're quadriplegic, if you don't have something deeper than I'm feeling my thinking, pardon me, but you're screwed. But the more deeply you understand the spiritual nature of life, and that this is not our home, this is a temporary place. And to me, it's real simple. People say, what's the purpose? I think the purpose is to learn to give and receive love, period. To learn how to give and receive love, to learn what love really looks like. Then you're not afraid of dying. You're not afraid of even being paralyzed from the neck down. It's not on my book, what do they call it? Your bucket list. But I don't live in fear of what might happen next, because I know this universal mind to me is not some airy-fairy thing made up. It's what's behind the universe. It's what had the hummingbird the other day kind of come over and say hi to me and thank me for the hummingbird thing that I put up down at the other end. But it didn't have to come over in front of me and do a little dance. But it did. To me, it was saying thank you. And it went back and ate. There's all kinds of things in life that you'll see every day that you'll realize the universe is alive. It's all alive. And we're part of it. And we can scare the shit out of ourselves, but we don't have to.
Yeah. We can go to a movie for that. We don't need to.
No, and it's innocent. It's innocent. It's innocent. It's just that any thinking I'm doing that's taking me away from a light heart, to me, deserves to be left alone until I feel better. And we always feel better.
Perfect. I think because it's at the top of the hour now. So I think that's a really good place for us to pause this series, because it just, you've simplified. You've taken all these complicated illnesses and experiences people can have, and you've just simplified it right down to look in the direction of peace.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I know some people listening might be like, well, how do I do that? And it's just like, well, you know, really studying these principles is a direct and fast route. But any time you find yourself in an experience of peace, just notice, go more in that direction.
Grateful, be grateful. More of that. Do more of that. You know, what was it? Linda Pransky said, you know, when he and George went to them and to Sid and said, well, you know, are there times when you're not fighting? He said, yeah, there's times when we're nice to each other. He said, do more of that. You know?
Yeah, exactly. So,
and when we think of behavior, we think of physical activity, but behavior is also what we're doing with our thinking, which thoughts we're paying attention to. And that affects another branch of behavior, which is our physiology.
Yeah.
Every thought we pay attention to affects every cell in our body.
Whoa.
That's what the cell biologists say.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense.
So, if people, so I just want to let people know that the outcome, and I'm going to be hassling him, of this program is going to be Dr. Bill's book. So I'm going to keep saying it so that it's going to get life and become a thing. So you know, if you've got questions about any of these, just let me know through the Portal's Facebook group, because I can then feed those to Dr. Bill. He wants to know all these questions so that he can really, when he does his chapters, he's going to come back to these themes, and he's going to be really interested in the questions that people have. So we had loads of them this time. I think we've covered a lot of them, some of them not quite, but don't worry. Every question you have will be fed into the content of Dr. Bill's book, and he's very good at scooping them up this way and that way. He's a master at it. So even if we didn't get to every detail today, I think what we did do is we got to the bottom line. And I think when you see the bottom line, then all the details, they kind of merge together really and create one picture. But what an amazing, beautiful, I mean, the storytelling tonight was almost unbelievable, you know, almost unbelievable.
You know, and people tell me, Elizabeth, they say, you should not tell such dramatic stories. Well, there are a lot of people who just saw this incrementally, you know, and their health changed incrementally. But I think showing what's possible, it gives hope that at any time that could happen. That's what Sid said. We're one thought away from mental and I would say physical well-being. You know, that lady who wrote the book about her disseminated cancer. I mean, things that people call miracles happen, but they happen because of something that the person has an insight to their true spiritual nature. That's where it happens.
Now I'm just suddenly realizing I'm not on the ball, because I need to know what the next episode is. So just quickly give me a second to get, because we're going to be having one in 2 weeks' time. So I'll just kind of do a little bit of filling. Yeah, we're going to have another session with Dr. Bill in 2 weeks' time, taking on another mental health disorder. And I'm not sure if you can tell me right now what that is, but I'm going to, hopefully it'll pop up on my Facebook.
It was on that. Let's see.
It'll be here in a sec.
Is it coming?
It's coming, and it is going to be October the 5th. Oh, now this is an interesting one. This is super interesting, because this is starting to get into the area where people are very, well, no, that's outside of my kind of pay grade. We're trying to talk about personality disorders. So we're going to be exploring that next one, which includes narcissistic personality disorder. And we know very famous people who seems to be diagnosed with these kind of disorders. So we'll have a very fun day, a fun event, really getting to the bottom of what is that actually, and how is that our friend? Because so far everything's our friend. So how is that our friend? And we will yeah, the things that look a little bit more outside the norm. We can relate to depression, anxiety, most of us. We all got physical bodies, but personality disorders is something that often is seen mainstream in the psychiatric world as exceptional. So
I've even heard people in the 3 principles community say, don't try to help anyone with a borderline personality disorder. It's impossible. Yeah.
Well, you heard it here first, that it is possible, and there is hope for real change, no matter what you're dealing with in life.
Because there's always hope, because there's always health.